The day I found out my parents left everything to Michael, I didn't feel shock. I felt a cold, mathematical clarity. So, I calmly took out my phone, logged into my banking app, and canceled all the automated transfers. It was $4,800 that they took from me monthly for a house that, as it turned out, would never be mine, but would become my brother's property. My name is Jake. I'm 35. Over the past 10 years, I've built a pretty successful software development company, which, of course, they only know about from my sparse accounts at rare family dinners. I'm a classic self-made man, a grinder who works 80 hours a week because I have to, because I always had to. My brother, Michael, is 5 years younger than me. In our family, he was always the project that required attention, investment, and eternal support. I was the achiever who paved his own way, and that, it seemed, freed my parents from any obligation to me. Growing up, it was like this. I got a scholarship to the University of Washington, but the scholarship only covered part of it, and I paid for the rest myself. I worked on campus, slept 4 hours a night, and took out loans. When I once asked my father, Robert, why they couldn't help more, he simply said I was strong and independent enough. At the same time, Michael, with his mediocre grades, attended an expensive private college and lived all 4 years fully paid for by my parents. No odd jobs, no loans. When I asked about the disparity back then, my mother, Susan, calmly replied that Michael needed more support because he wasn't as composed as I was. That pattern didn't change as we got older. I started my company, survived 2 years of crisis, slept on a couch in the office, and reinvested every dollar. Michael tried his hand at 3 different business ventures, all of which failed within a year. The first, a vinyl record store, cost my parents $50,000 of their savings. The second, an online food delivery service, wiped out another $30,000 from their retirement account. No reproaches, no questions, just sympathy and a new injection of cash whenever they had it. To them, I was an ATM with a sense of duty. 2 years ago, when my parents complained about rising property taxes and said they were struggling, I set up the monthly transfer without question. For $1,800, exactly the amount of their monthly mortgage payment. It was a significant sum that I could have been investing in growth, but they were my parents. I just wanted them to be comfortable, and I wanted to be able to work peacefully, knowing they were taken care of. I didn't expect gratitude, I just assumed, like any normal person, that it was fair, and that when the time came, the assets I had effectively helped preserve would be divided equally. I was wrong. The call from Thomas Wilson, my parents' attorney, caught me in the middle of signing a major contract. He invited me to a meeting to discuss inheritance and estate planning. I thought, great, finally a formality that will confirm I'm not an idiot and that they, despite all their blind love for Michael, will at least handle the financial matter maturely. I arrived at the downtown office, dressed as if for an investor meeting, but inside, I sensed something was wrong. Robert and Susan sat like statues, avoiding my gaze. Michael was next to them, casually adjusting a watch I knew cost more than his monthly income. I sat down across from them. Wilson was straightforward, emotionless. He opened a folder and began talking about a decision Robert and Susan had made that they felt was important to communicate to us. Robert and Susan have decided to transfer all their assets into Michael's name, who will be the sole beneficiary of their estate, Wilson said, his tone unchanged. The words hung in the air. I looked at my parents. They wouldn't look at me. I'm sorry, did I hear that correctly? I asked. Wilson continued. The house, investment accounts, insurance policies. Everything will pass to Michael. You, Jake, will receive your father's baseball card collection and, as specifically requested by Susan, the old family recipe book. Felt like a very bad joke. Baseball cards and a cookbook. After all the years, all the money. I finally looked at my father, and he raised his eyes for the first time. Jake, he began, his voice wavering slightly. We thought about this a lot. You're successful, you built your company. Michael needs more security than you do. We're just trying to be practical. My mother quickly chimed in. You've always been so good at taking care of yourself. I ignored both of them and addressed the lawyer, who was calmly turning papers. "Mr. Wilson, can you explain exactly what assets we are talking about?" "The house, which I know is worth about $800,000, and for which I've been paying the $4,800 monthly mortgage for the past 2 years?" He nodded. "Yes, the house. And the accounts, which total approximately $220,000, partly built up from funds you transferred to them." And then he delivered the phrase that made me feel like the air was knocked out of me. "Additionally," Wilson continued, "your parents recently took out a new mortgage on the house to provide capital for Michael's new business venture. The amount of the new mortgage is $350,000. The monthly payment for it is exactly $4,800. "What?" I nearly laughed at the absurdity. They hadn't needed my help with the old payment. They had paid off their original mortgage years ago. They had taken out this new mortgage to finance another of Michael's doomed schemes, knowing I would automatically cover the payment. I was paying for a house that was financing my brother, and which would never be mine. "And you expect me to continue these payments?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. My father cleared his throat. "We would appreciate your continued support during this transition period, once Michael's business takes off." "Let me understand this," I interrupted, slowly getting to my feet. "You took out a new loan on your debt-free house to give money to Michael. You completely excluded me from your will, leaving him absolutely everything, and you still expect me to keep paying your new debt so that this house eventually goes entirely to my brother?" The room fell silent. Michael looked at his watch. My mother nervously stroked my father's hand. I didn't wait for an answer. I picked up my jacket. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate your transparency." "Jake, wait!" My mother cried out as I headed for the door. "We should talk about this. Dinner is Sunday." I stopped at the door and turned back. I saw my nervous, greedy parents, my brother who looked at me with a barely concealed sense of superiority, and the lawyer with his neat stacks of papers documenting my humiliation. "I won't be at dinner," I said quietly. "I have some financial planning of my own to complete." I left without looking back. I silenced my phone and drove home. As soon as I parked, I logged into my bank app. The process was quick and surgically precise. I found the automatic monthly transfer of $4,800 and clicked Cancel all future payments. I didn't even hesitate. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was closing an account. I was an ATM to them, and now that ATM was out of service. A few minutes later, the first text from my mother came through. I didn't even read it. I knew the storm would begin tomorrow, and I needed to be ready for it. But for the first time in years, I felt I didn't have to pay for them. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of stress, but because of a deep, focused calm that came from making a clear, definitive move. It wasn't about the money itself. I could absorb the $4,800 loss. It was about reclaiming my worth. I needed to know the exact extent of the damage, the full financial narrative they had built without me knowing. I spent the early hours of the morning going through every bank record, every canceled check, every transaction for the last decade, logging it all into a spreadsheet. I documented everything I had contributed. The college tuition differences, the medical bills for Robert's triple bypass, the emergency home repairs that conveniently happened right before Michael needed capital for a new scheme. The total was staggering, far more than I had initially guessed. Over $250,000 in 7 years. $250,000 I could have used to buy a house, secure my retirement, or expand my business tenfold. Instead, it had been funneled into keeping my parents comfortable and, more accurately, bankrolling Michael's existence. The true revelation was seeing how the money moved. I found several large transfers from my parents' account to Michael's personal savings account just days after my mortgage assistance hit their account. They weren't just taking my help. They were actively redirecting it. They hadn't just deceived me about the will. They had been using me as a covert financial conduit to my brother all along. Every dollar I thought was helping them age gracefully was actually subsidizing Michael's series of spectacular failures and expensive tastes, like the Tag Heuer watch he was fidgeting with in the lawyer's office. This was no longer just parental favoritism. It was a cold, systematic betrayal and exploitation. The storm hit precisely at 9:15 a.m. on Wednesday, 3 days after I had canceled the standing transfers. I was on a construction site, reviewing the structural plans for a new office building my company was purchasing. My phone, which I had deliberately kept silent, started buzzing like a trapped insect. I waited until I was back in my truck before checking it. 7 missed calls. 4 from Robert, 3 from Susan. Then the texts. Susan, 9:15 a.m. Jake. Dear. There must be a mistake with the bank. The transfer hasn't gone through. The payment is due today. Robert, 9:16 a.m. Call me immediately. This is unacceptable. We need to discuss your responsibilities. Responsibilities. The word hit me hard. I had responsibilities to my employees, to my clients, and most importantly, to myself. My responsibilities to them had been paid in full, and then some with no expectation of reciprocity, only to discover their true nature. I didn't call back right away. I drove to my office, instructed my assistant, Tina, to hold all non-urgent calls, and spent 30 minutes reviewing my notes, the financial facts laid out in black and white. I needed to be armed with data, not emotion. When I finally called their house line, Susan answered on the first ring, her voice tight with artificial panic. Jake, thank God. Is it the bank? Did you fix it? It's not a bank error, Mom, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I canceled the transfers. A long silence followed, broken only by a sharp intake of breath on her end. I don't understand, she stammered. Why? The mortgage is due today, Jake. They will call the bank. I'm aware of that, I replied. This is about the meeting with Thomas Wilson. This is about establishing financial boundaries. Boundaries? Are you punishing us for some slight? For giving Michael a bit more help? Her voice rose, becoming brittle. No, Mom, I corrected her. I am not punishing you. I am simply refusing to pay a mortgage on a house that you secretly remortgaged to fund Michael's business, while simultaneously ensuring that all of your assets, including the house, will go exclusively to him. That isn't a slight. That is a calculated, decade-long decision to exploit my success while enabling his failures. I heard muffled sounds, then the unmistakable, heavy breathing of my father taking the phone. What the hell do you think you're doing, Jake? He demanded, his voice suddenly loud and angry. Your mother is in tears. We are your parents. You don't set boundaries with us. I've been setting a boundary for the last 10 years, I countered, the calmness in my voice making my point clearer than any shout. I paid you back for my upbringing, which, frankly, was unbalanced at best. I have contributed over $250,000 to your household in the last 7 years. Money that I now know mostly financed Michael's life. You took out a new, massive loan behind my back, knowing I was your payment source. This stops now. The conversation deteriorated quickly. He threatened to cut me off from the family. He yelled about how this was the house I grew up in, trying to weaponize nostalgia and guilt. I remained firm. It is the house you mortgaged to subsidize Michael, and it's the house that will belong to him anyway. I repeated the facts like a mantra. It is no longer my financial responsibility. The call ended with Robert slamming down the phone and declaring, Fine, don't expect to be welcome at Sunday dinner ever again. Jake, don't call us. The threat, which was meant to crush me, felt like a liberation. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure campaign intensified exactly as I had expected. It was relentless. Daily calls, texts ranging from passive-aggressive, "We don't understand why you're punishing us like this," to outright accusations of heartlessness. They tried the family gaslighting routine. They hadn't sacrificed anything for me since I was 18. If anything, I had sacrificed my own financial growth for them. Then they escalated. My mother started contacting people in my professional network. She called my longtime associate, Emily, at our biggest client firm, claiming she was worried about Jake's mental state and his erratic financial decisions. She implied I might be having a breakdown due to work stress, trying to plant seeds of doubt about my stability and professional judgment. When Emily called me, sounding uncomfortable and cautious, and told me about Susan's call, I felt a cold knot of realization tighten in my stomach. They were not just trying to pressure me. They were actively trying to damage my professional reputation to force me back into compliance. That was the line. Attacking my professional credibility crossed a boundary I hadn't expected, even from them. They had moved from emotional manipulation to outright sabotage. I realized then that they truly saw me as a resource to be manipulated, not a son with legitimate grievances. To them, I was the pulse-driven ATM, and when I stopped dispensing cash, their only solution was to try and break the machine. I started documenting these calls immediately, asking my contacts to keep detailed records. I scheduled an urgent meeting with my business lawyer to discuss options for a cease and desist or even a restraining order if the harassment continued to escalate to this level of professional interference. The final, predictable text came yesterday afternoon. The house had missed the payment deadline. Susan, 3:45 p.m. Jake, the bank is threatening to begin foreclosure proceedings if the $4,800 is not paid immediately. Please, we can lose everything. I stared at the screen for a long time. Everything they stood to lose. Everything I had already lost in time, effort, and money poured into their chosen path. I typed my reply and hit send. It was just 5 words. Jake, 3:50 p.m. That payment is not mine. There was no immediate response, just silence. That silence was heavier than any shout. They were finally face to face with the true consequences of their actions, and they had nowhere left to turn. My stomach churned, but the hand that held the phone was steady. The month of confrontation had begun, and I knew I wouldn't back down. The question was not if the dam would break, but how spectacular the flood would be. My reply, "That payment is not mine," was followed by silence for the rest of the day. But I knew it was the calm before the storm. The true escalation began the following morning with a new conflict. Public humiliation. I was in my office reviewing Q4 projections with my team. My assistant, Tina, who had a look of controlled panic on her face, interrupted the meeting. She handed me my phone and a piece of paper. On the screen was a call from a number I didn't recognize. On the paper, in Tina's neat handwriting, were 3 words, "Don't answer it." I excused myself from the room and took the call. It was my cousin Rachel. We hadn't spoken in years. Her voice was tense. "Jake, what is going on?" she asked, without a greeting. "Aunt Susan just called me. She said you've had a complete breakdown and that you're threatening to bankrupt the family." She was crying. "She said you're acting like a stranger." The last time I heard her sound so upset was when Uncle Robert had his heart attack. I took a deep breath. "Rachel, I haven't had a breakdown. I've stopped paying their mortgage." "But why?" She made it sound like you've completely abandoned them for no reason. She said you were acting erratically and that she's worried about your mental health. The money I've been giving them for the mortgage was to pay for a new loan they took out for Michael's latest business venture. A loan they got without telling me, I explained, my voice flat. And they've written me out of the will, leaving everything to him. I stopped paying for a house that will never be mine. There was a long silence on the other end. "Oh my God," she finally said. She didn't mention any of that. She just said you've gone crazy. She made it sound like she was the victim. "My mom has been texting me, too, asking if I've noticed anything off with you. They're trying to build a narrative." That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about getting me to pay again. It was about controlling the story. They couldn't admit to their calculated deception. So they were painting me as the villain, the unstable, cruel son. It was a new level of psychological warfare. They were turning a financial boundary into a character flaw, using family connections as weapons. Over the next few days, the calls and texts from extended family members continued. My Aunt Emily called, her voice full of concern. She had heard a story from Susan that was so distorted, it was almost unrecognizable. Susan had told her that I had betrayed the family's trust by going against a long-standing agreement to financially support Michael, and that I was jealous of his new business. I calmly and factually laid out the timeline for Emily. The years of my financial support, the lack of transparency, the secret new mortgage, and the estate planning meeting where they had essentially disowned me. Emily listened, her quiet and thoughtful demeanor telling me she was taking it all in. "I had no idea, Jake," she said. "Your mother has always been a little dramatic. But this is a new low. They're trying to use us to make you feel guilty." It was a small validation, but it didn't stop the pressure. I started receiving calls from my parents' friends, from old family acquaintances. They would all begin with some variation of, "I'm calling because your mother is so worried about you." I would calmly state the facts, but I could hear in their voices that the narrative was already set. They heard what they wanted to hear, that I was the problem. This public campaign was working. It was creating an atmosphere of resentment and suspicion. A few of my business contacts began to ask questions, in a very subtle, casual way, about my personal life. One client, a man I'd been working with for years, asked me if everything was all right at home, because he heard some things, and wanted to make sure I wasn't getting too distracted. My mother was making good on her threat to damage my reputation. The tension was getting worse, not only for me but for my family as well. Michael's upscale sports bar was hemorrhaging money. The bank was starting to call Robert and Susan, demanding the overdue mortgage payment. The pressure was now coming from all sides, and I could feel my parents' desperation growing. 3 weeks into the month-long standoff, a new, unexpected conflict was introduced. Michael himself called me. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since the lawyer's office, and his text message, again, making everything about you, had been all I needed to know about his mindset. But something in me compelled me to pick up the phone. His voice was shaky, not with anger, but with something I had never heard from him before: fear. "Jake," he began, "they're going to lose the house. The bank sent them a foreclosure notice. They said if they don't get the payment, they're starting the process." I said nothing. "Don't you see what this is doing to them?" he pleaded. "Mom is a wreck. Dad looks a decade older. You have to do something. You have to make the payment." "No," I said, my voice as solid as stone. "I won't. I've explained why. I paid my share and more. The house will be yours anyway. You need to talk to them, Michael." "Talk to them about what?" he said, the anger finally breaking through his fear. "They said it was all going to be fine. They said you would always be there to help us. They told you that I would be their financial safety net forever?" I asked, a bitter smile on my face. "They lied to both of us, Michael. They lied to me for a decade, and they lied to you now. They used me to finance your life, and now they expect you to fix their mess." "This isn't my mess. This is your mess," he shouted into the phone. "You caused this. You're being selfish." That was the last straw. The public attacks, the gaslighting, the weaponizing of family. It was all designed to make me feel selfish, to make me doubt my own sanity. But hearing it from him, the very person who had benefited the most from my so-called generosity, was a final, sickening confirmation. He didn't see the betrayal. He only saw the loss of his financial security. "I caused this," I said, the bitterness in my voice barely controlled. "I didn't take out a secret mortgage for a business I knew nothing about. I didn't exclude you from a will. I didn't lie for years about where my money was going. You are all facing the consequences of your own choices. And for the first time in my life, so am I." I hung up, not needing to hear any more. The tension was at its breaking point. I had drawn the line, and now they were all feeling the heat from being on the other side of it. The next move was theirs, and I was prepared for whatever it was. My own father was losing the house I grew up in, and my brother was desperately pleading with me to save it. But I wasn't going to. My decision was made. I was a son, not a bank, and they were about to learn the difference. The intensity of the pressure campaign didn't ease. It became desperate. Michael's frightened plea was just the starting gun for the final, chaotic week of the month-long standoff. My father, Robert, had apparently moved past anger and into raw panic. He no longer called, he showed up. 2 days after Michael's call, I was leaving a meeting with my business attorney, finalizing the paperwork to shield my company's assets from any familial interference, when Robert appeared from around the corner of the building. He was wearing the same jacket he'd had on at the lawyer's office, but it looked crumpled, and his face was gray. He didn't shout this time. He just stood in my path, a physical barrier. "Jake, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and raspy. He didn't look like the man who had yelled at me over the phone. He looked defeated. "I have nothing to say that I haven't already said, Robert," I replied, maintaining a professional distance. "The payment is not my responsibility. The bank is moving forward," he whispered, glancing around the busy street. "We have 72 hours before they file the initial papers. We're gonna lose the house, Jake. Your mother is talking about leaving. She can't handle the stress." "She's talking about leaving?" I asked. This was a new layer of manipulation. Or is she trying to manipulate me into paying by threatening to leave the situation she helped create? He shook his head, looking genuinely heartbroken, a look I hadn't seen from him since I was a small child. "No, this is real. She feels betrayed by me too, Jake. She thinks I should have controlled Michael more. She thinks I should have handled the estate planning differently. The truth is, I messed up. I thought you would always be there. I genuinely believed that because you were so successful, you wouldn't mind helping Michael get a start. I underestimated how much this would hurt you. I felt the control I had maintained for weeks start to crack. This wasn't the aggressive, entitled Robert. This was a man admitting to a fundamental, decades-long misjudgment. You didn't underestimate, Robert." I corrected him, keeping my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. "You used me. You made a calculation. That the son who always delivered was the one who could be safely disregarded in the end. And you were wrong." "I know," he said, and the single word was heavier than any apology I'd ever heard. "But listen, if you make this one payment, just the $4,800 to stop the clock, we can fix this. We can refinance the new loan, put the house back in both your names, or sell it and split the equity. I'll even fire Thomas Wilson. I just need time. Please, Jake. For me. For your mother." He was offering a retreat, a chance to stop the inevitable fallout. It was a clear moral dilemma. Do I save the house I grew up in, and potentially the core stability of my parents' lives, even though it means rewarding their past exploitation? Or do I hold my ground, ensuring they face the full consequence of their actions, potentially leading to their financial ruin? I told him I would think about it, a non-committal response that felt like a lie on my tongue, and watched him walk away. Later that afternoon, a call came from an unknown number. I almost missed it, but something told me to pick up. "Hello, Jake. This is David, Michael's business partner." I hadn't known Michael even had a partner for his sports bar. "What do you want, David?" "I'm calling because I need to talk to you about the $350,000, David said, his voice professional but strained. "Michael is losing it. The place is underwater, and now the bank is calling his parents about the house. I need to know if you're going to make that payment, because if you don't, I'm out." "That payment is not my responsibility," I repeated for the 100th time. "It's my parents' debt, for a house that is supposed to go to Michael. You should be talking to him." "I am talking to him. But here's the thing you don't know," David continued, and his next words were the key plot twist I hadn't expected. "That $350,000 loan wasn't taken out for the bar, Jake. The bar only needed $150,000. The other $200,000? That was for Michael's personal debt. He owed a bookie a lot of money. Your parents, your mother specifically, insisted on taking the full $350,000 to cover everything. They leveraged the house not just for his business, but to bail him out of a massive gambling debt." The air felt thin. Gambling debt. Not another failed business, but a massive, humiliating personal liability. The betrayal suddenly had a name worse than favoritism. It was hiding a secret, dangerous addiction. They hadn't lied just to fund a business. They had lied to save Michael from something serious, something that could have destroyed him or worse, and they had pulled me in to cover the trail. The $4,800 payment wasn't an investment in a startup. It was the insurance policy against Michael's dangerous habits. "You're sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I'm sure. I saw the paperwork. Michael's never been good with money, and his sports betting got way out of control last year. Your mother was terrified. That's why they were so rigid about the $4,800. It had to cover the new mortgage and his other financial obligations. They were saving Michael from himself, but they needed your money to do it. I hung up the phone in a daze. Everything changed. The estate planning wasn't about favoring the less successful son. It was about protecting the volatile son. The exclusion from the will wasn't a slight. It was a way to keep their assets entirely under Michael's control for the rest of his life. A move that only made sense if he was a liability, not an heir. I had been right about the exploitation, but I had completely missed the desperate reason for it. It wasn't just greed and favoritism. It was fear. Fear of their son's self-destruction. And I was the only person who could stop the consequence now. I looked at the notes from the meeting with Robert. He had offered me the house, the equity, the reconciliation. But now I knew the price. Silence about Michael's addiction and perpetual financial enablement. If I paid, I would save the house, but I would also be giving Michael the clearest signal that his dangerous habits had no real consequences, because Big Brother would always cover the bill. If I didn't pay, the house would be lost, but the truth about Michael would finally surface, potentially forcing him to confront his problem. It was no longer about money or a house. It was a choice between enabling my brother's life-threatening dysfunction or forcing him to face reality, even if it meant destroying my parents' comfort. The clock was ticking, and the weight of that decision was crushing me. The revelation about Michael's gambling debt completely reframed the betrayal. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about saving a life, or perhaps more accurately, refusing to enable a slow self-destruction. The 48 hours after David's call were the longest of my life. I barely worked, consumed by the moral weight of the choice. If I paid, I secured the house for my parents, my childhood home, and bought Michael another year of secrecy and destructive habits. If I didn't pay, the bank would begin foreclosure, the truth about Michael's addiction would surface, and my parents would lose the single largest asset they had. I stood at the nexus of necessary cruelty and self-preservation. I needed to see it clearly, without the haze of guilt they had wrapped around the situation. I had paid $250,000 to keep the peace. What was the real cost of this one last payment? It wasn't $4,800. It was the complete forfeiture of my own boundaries, the reaffirmation that their entitlement was justified, and the guarantee that Michael would never seek help. I would become the permanent financial shield for his dangerous illness. I made the decision on Friday morning, the day the bank's final deadline was set to expire. I called Robert. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with desperation. "Jake, did you do it? Did you make the transfer?" The bank manager called an hour ago. "No, Robert," I said, my voice steady, though my hand was shaking against the desk. "I did not make the payment." A heavy, sickening silence fell over the line. It was the sound of a consequence finally landing. "What?" he finally managed, his voice a pathetic squeak. "Jake, you can't. You can't let us lose everything. Your mother is hysterical. Where are we supposed to go?" "You've had weeks to figure that out," I replied, the emotion finally breaking through my monotone. "You chose this, Robert. You chose to lie to me for years. You chose to gamble my money to bail Michael out of a gambling addiction. I know about the $200,000 debt, Robert. I know what the $350,000 loan was really for. You didn't just exclude me from the will. You pulled me into a dangerous, systemic lie to enable your favorite son." He didn't try to deny it. There was only a gasp, then a ragged, heavy sigh. "You weren't supposed to know that, Jake. We were trying to protect him. We were trying to protect the family." "You were protecting the secret," I corrected him. "You were protecting Michael from the consequences of his actions by making me pay the price. And in doing so, you were guaranteeing he would never stop. I love you, but I will not pay for your silence and his addiction. The money stops now, and the truth comes out." Robert broke down on the phone, not with anger or manipulation, but with pure, raw shame. He confessed everything: the fear of losing Michael, the desperation, the shame of asking me to cover such a massive, hidden liability. He admitted he was wrong about the will, about the years of favoritism, about seeing me as an endless resource. "I am so sorry, Jake," he sobbed. "I destroyed my relationship with my best son to save the one who refused to be saved. We need help. All of us." I ended the call shortly after. I felt no triumph, only a profound, exhausting sadness. I hadn't won anything. I had simply forced an overdue reckoning. The fallout was immediate. The bank began the foreclosure process that afternoon. The news, stripped of my parents' careful narrative, spread like wildfire through the extended family. Aunt Emily called me immediately. She was disgusted by the truth, and this time the family narrative shifted completely. The victim was no longer Susan, hysterical over a missed payment. The victim was me, the son whose hard-earned money had been systematically misused for a decade to cover a secret gambling problem. The extended family, the same people they had tried to manipulate, now turned their backs on my parents, furious about the lies and the financial risk they had taken. The climax was less a huge explosion and more a terrible, slow crumbling. Robert and Susan were forced to sell the house quickly to avoid the foreclosure stain on their credit, accepting a steep loss to pay off the remaining $350,000 and the accumulated interest. They moved into a small, rented apartment, a modest, simple place that finally reflected their actual financial standing without my constant subsidy. The money they made on the house sale was barely enough to cover the new debts, leaving them with minimal savings. As for Michael, the sports bar collapsed almost immediately under the weight of his mismanagement and the withdrawal of his secret safety net. The exposure of his gambling problem, prompted by the financial crisis, finally forced him to acknowledge it. He entered rehab, a move I would have bet against even a month prior. The month ended with the house officially being sold. I didn't attend the closing. I didn't talk to Michael. I only spoke to Robert. He called me from their new, quiet apartment. "We are doing better, Jake," he said, his voice genuinely calm. "We're living within our means. Michael is in a center. It's horrible, but it's what he needed. And we owe that clarity to you. You had the courage to say no when we were too afraid to stop enabling him." "I did what I had to do," I replied, still detached. "I know," he said. "The recipe book and the baseball cards are yours. They're waiting for you. But I want to talk to you not as the family's bank, but as your father. I want to try to be honest now." I did not immediately agree to see him. The betrayal was too deep, the scar too fresh. I knew that forgiveness wouldn't mean returning to the old dynamics. It would mean establishing a new relationship built on transparency, without the expectation of payment. The physical house was gone, but the emotional foundation of our family had finally been exposed. It was rotten, but now it could perhaps be rebuilt on solid ground. I drove out to the old house one last time before the new owners took possession. I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the windows where I had grown up, where I had studied late, feeling the weight of obligation. Now that weight was lifted. It was just a building, stripped of the financial power it once held over me. The month had been brutal. I had lost my relationship with my parents as I knew it, but I had gained something far more valuable: my own self-worth and financial freedom. I had learned that sometimes the most loving and courageous thing you can do for the people you care about is to refuse to enable their dysfunction, even if it means watching them fall. They had to hit rock bottom to see the truth, and I had been the one who had to stop cushioning the impact. I didn't know if we would ever fully reconcile, but I knew I would never pay for their peace again. I drove away from the silent house, not toward an end, but toward a difficult, undefined, but genuinely honest future.